Welcome to MCLE This Week. I'm your host, program attorney Bruce Richard. Our guest today is Korrin Peterson, an environmental attorney with Bowditch Dewey. Welcome, Korrin.
Hi, Bruce.
Hey. So, Korrin, why don't we start off by having you tell us all a little bit about yourself and your practice? I know you joined Bowditch in the fall of 25, but so let us know what's been happening in your life in the last few years.
Oh, a lot, actually. So, Bruce, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak to you today and give the beach season briefing. It's a great title, by the way. That's a lot of fun. So prior to joining Bowditch in 2025, a move that I really love, by the way, and hope to talk more about.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I served as chief advocate for the Buzzards Bay Coalition for more than 20 years. For those who don't know the Buzzards Bay Coalition, it is an environmental nonprofit based down in the city of New Bedford, and it's dedicated to the protection of Buzzards Bay and all of the land surrounding it. As you might imagine, life as an environmental lawyer for a nonprofit is not that of a traditional lawyer. I did serve as a litigator in federal and state court. I filed administrative appeals. I brought
Okay.
citizen enforcement actions against wetland violators. That all sounds like traditional lawyer work.
Yeah.
I would file permit appeals for large developments that added pollution to already polluted waters. But in addition to all of that, I wrote and lobbied for state legislation for better environmental laws. I wrote and helped communities pass local bylaws and regulations. But there's where the traditional legal work kind of stops.
Right.
It's a nonprofit, so I was also responsible for identifying, applying for, and managing state and federal grants
Okay.
to implement projects. So what are you talking like? What do you mean projects? It's pollution reduction projects. So
Okay.
I was also a glorified project manager who became an expert in wastewater.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yes.
So just real quick with the coalition, I mean, I'm assuming so the grants, I'm assuming were the primary source of funding for the coalition, or was there other fundraising aspects that were going with this, and did you get sucked into a pile of that as well?
So a majority of the budget for this particular nonprofit was all private donations.
Okay.
So more than 12,000 members who support the organization on an annual basis.
Okay.
And so, which was really great. It's a very healthy organization. We got project specific funds from state and federal grants.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, as far as before this conversation, the only thing I knew about the Buzzards Bay Coalition was that they were the ones that hosted I think they hosted a fun bike ride, the 100, the
So,
60, and the 30-mile rides
yep,
around Buzzards Bay. So,
yeah. It's the first weekend in first weekend in October every
yeah,
year is the watershed ride.
right.
So yeah, we go from Little Compton, Rhode Island to Woods Hole in Falmouth. It's a great ride. I've done it several times.
Oh, it seems like a lot. Um,
It's fun.
so involved in wastewater. So how so?
I got to learn all about the pollution constituents in wastewater and what they were doing to water quality. I learned how a wastewater treatment facility operates and how they treat for those specific pollutants. I even installed, like, hired, contractors and got into septic tanks and helped install state of the art pollution reducing wastewater systems.
That's
Um,
a little out of the norm for most attorneys, I gotta say.
yeah, yeah. So, in addition to the suit, I was also donning a hard hat and work boots. So it was a really interesting 2-decade career, and I learned a lot, and I have a very unique perspective on environmental issues.
So before we started, I was going to make the joke and say that you've dipped your toe into wastewater, but it sounds like more like you've done a little bit more than just just the toe
At
into
least up to my
wastewater.
elbow.
So now that you're out of nonprofit and over with Bowditch and away from So are you finally away from wastewater, or is this expertise following you into into the private sector?
I am happy to say that my expertise in wastewater actually got me to Bowditch.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it is what made me pivot into private practice.
Okay. So what are you doing at Bowditch now?
Um, I am not just a wastewater expert, although I was specifically brought in to help with wastewater utility clients and the challenges that they are facing. But I'm doing everything from, air permitting to 21E brownfields cleanup, real estate transactions. So the breadth of substantive environmental law I'm doing on a daily basis is very re-energizing after a couple of decades focusing on water quality.
Right. So how have you found the transition from nonprofit to the law firm world?
It's great. I really love it. So for 20 years, I was an advocate for the Bay. I'm very
Right.
passionate about that. Now I get to share that passion with dozens of clients. Ultimately,
Okay.
I really love helping people and solving their problems. So I really appreciate sitting down with clients, listening to what their goals are, and figuring out the best way for them to achieve those goals.
Right. So, okay, so for attorneys who don't practice in this area, so how would you describe environmental law in a practical sense?
For attorneys who don't practice environmental law, they
Yeah.
find it very, very frustrating um, because it's not just about the law. It's about the science behind the law. So it's the science of wastewater. It's the science of drinking water. It's chemistry, but it's also not just the science. It's also the finance
Right.
aspect of environmental law. Um, it Environmental law requires a lot of agility because it's always changing. Because our environment is always changing, whether
Right.
it's climate change, which is causing sea level rise, and what is that doing to our coastal infrastructure? What laws applied 30 years ago probably are not the laws that we're applying today,
Right.
and how those laws are impacting decisions is there. It's constantly evolving.
Right. Now, so did you have the science background before you got involved, or was that something that just sort of develops as you're in the practice?
It developed while in practice. I was an economics major in college.
Okay.
I focused on environmental economics and resource economics, so there was always sort of an environmental focus.
Sure.
I was a policy nerd through college and then went on to law school to sort of further develop that. Um, I really wanted to be a scientist. I was never very good at it until I had to sit down and figure out the nitrogen cycle and why that was an issue in wastewater.
Right. So I know that this practice also tends to involve a big focus on public policy. And I know that you've drafted legislation. So, but how is that different from, I don't know, from what most of us would call typical lawyering?
Yeah, so legislative advocacy is, again, it's problem solving just on a different scale.
Right.
Um, so typical lawyering, which, it's hard to, I've never really met a typical lawyer or a typical issue, but,
Right.
um, you know, a traditional legal issue, you're focused on how best to resolve that client's challenge in accordance with the interpretation of the day of that law. So
Right.
you apply the law to the facts, you represent your client. Legislative advocacy is it's focused on addressing challenges, but just on a societal basis, right? Um, it's just on a broader scale. I think it's very much legislative advocacy. It starts with us as the practitioners, the lawyers every day. We're whether it's environmental law, family law, tax law, we're
Mhm.
sitting there, we're representing our clients, we're applying the law. But there are these issues that start to repeat and arise where the law's just not working because something has changed in society, something has changed in the environment, and the law just doesn't make sense anymore. And as members of the bar, we start to talk to our colleagues about that and the challenges around the law. And then we start to talk, we broaden that conversation to, larger stakeholder groups. And there then develops an understanding that maybe the law itself needs to change in order to accommodate the changing times.
Right.
Um, and so it's a matter of educating stakeholders. It's a matter of coming up with solutions, making sure your solution doesn't have an unintended consequence to another law. So it is complicated. They call it sausage making for a reason.
Yeah.
But it's problem solving on a policy level.
Right.
Advance your practice with the MCLE Online Pass. For one monthly subscription fee, you can access everything MCLE has online: live and on-demand webcasts, ebooks, forms, checklists, and more. Start your free trial today at mcle.org/onlinepass.
When we reached out to folks in the office and sort of, what sort of questions do you want to ask during the podcast? Like one of the questions that somebody proposed was, what are some of the common legal issues that tend to arise at this time of the year? Meaning, this one's going to run in the summer. So what comes up as a legal issue in the summer? And I'm like, but if we're talking about public policy, I mean, it's not like this is seasonal work. So I mean, is that something that comes into consideration with your, with what you're doing, or is this, I mean, obviously a lot of these are long-term, multi-year targets. So,
Yeah.
so is seasonal a part of this?
So I think, Bruce, you were right when you say that these are constant issues.
Yeah.
Your environmental issues are going to arise 365 days a year, but we're going to see the consequences of environmental policies and laws more in the summer.
Right.
Because that's after a cold, long winter like we had this winter where we're
Yeah.
sick of shoveling and it's been gray for months. We emerge into wanting to be outside.
Right.
And so then you have, people who are flocking to the natural resources that we all enjoy during the summer, whether that's in the lake regions in New Hampshire or whether that's out on Cape Cod, around your favorite Kettle Hole Pond or on the coast somewhere.
Right.
I mean, the Cape Cod population by July 4th will more than double.
Yeah.
And so you have all of these homes and hotels that have been sitting dormant all winter long, all of a sudden are now teeming with people.
Right.
And so we're flocking to a place and we are kind of overloving it. And so you just have a whole bunch of
Right.
people. You have limited resources. In our coastal areas, we have limited infrastructure to support those people.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is we don't have the water and wastewater infrastructure, and so you have a lot of people coming, drinking more water, producing more wastewater in these coastal areas, and the
Right.
infrastructure is just not there to treat it. And so maybe we go to the bay or we go to our favorite beach or our pond and it's closed to swimming
Right.
because there's bacteria in the water or
Sure.
there's a toxic algae outbreak, because we've funneled all of these people to a place that we love and we want to enjoy without the infrastructure needed to support it and keep it protected and clean. Um, it's a huge challenge for our coastal areas and in our even just more inland in our rural communities. Communities have a really tough time affording infrastructure, and this
Right.
isn't a coastal issue. It's not just a coastal issue. It's a coastal issue. It's a Massachusetts issue, New England nationwide issue. Um, while in a nonprofit, helping communities try to raise funds and finance large infrastructure projects, you're competing with new schools, police stations, water treatment plants, roads, and wastewater tends to be the most expensive piece of infrastructure in a community and the least sexy to pay for with public dollars.
Right.
So
Yeah. I mean,
it's a challenge to actually, get the funds to, help just keep to either repair existing infrastructure, or build the new infrastructure to support new housing needs. It's just
right.
really expensive.
So is it the awareness over the summer is what you know, driving fundraising efforts or driving like how does that alter your day-to-day routine?
Yeah,
Or does
so
it?
it's a huge challenge because the folks that are responsible for paying for the infrastructure are the people who live there year round.
Yeah.
It's a pretty small population
Right.
with a limited tax base. The people who are using the infrastructure are coming there seasonally and are not necessarily paying for it.
Right.
So affording it, it's affordability issue.
Right. Yeah. Um, so for attorneys who practice in other areas, what are some of the red flags they should be aware of that signal they should be consulting with an environmental law attorney?
Yeah. So uh, environmental issues lurk around corners and will sneak up on you. Some examples might be if you are probating an estate, or maybe it's a dissolution of a marriage and you're breaking up assets in a coastal community and there's a house, you know, near the shoreline. If it's real estate and it's near a water resource, it has likely had to have an order of conditions from your local conservation commission. You
Okay.
want to make sure that, because like a conservation commission, if you're within 100 feet of a water resource or 200 feet of a river, you have to go get permission to do anything on your property. Not anything, but a substantial
Sure.
project. And so you want to evaluate whether that order has been complied with. Has it been closed out? Are there any enforcement actions, violations of the order? So you want to, keep an eye out of where the assets are situated within a community. Real estate transactions, whether they're commercial or residential. I don't feel like you can stick a shovel in the ground today in a developed area and not find some sort of legacy contamination from something somewhere.
Right.
So you want to make sure you're doing your environmental due diligence. I think our commercial real estate bar is very familiar with the requirements and why you need to do that. I would also encourage our residential real estate bar to keep an eye out for similar challenges. I've had clients that have purchased property and didn't know that there was an oil leak from an old home heating oil tank.
Right.
And it's hugely expensive for, a single family home to clean up, 20 gallons of an oil spill. I mean, it's
Right.
$400,000, and I
Yeah.
don't know a lot of folks who are buying first time home buyers who can afford that.
No.
So you just want
No.
to keep as representatives of our clients, we want to look out and sort of protect our clients' interests with that.
Right. And so if you've got the couple who's been married for 15 years and does have that beachfront property, it's like, okay, so what is the actual value of this? Because, you know, in the next 5 years, there may be a large tax bill sitting on their doorstep you know, for that beautiful view they've been enjoying for the last 20. So,
Yeah. And
yeah,
insurance rates will go up, and yeah,
yeah.
there's all those hidden costs.
So, final takeaway, what are the three key things you wish every attorney knew about environmental law?
Um, Environmental issues take time. There's rarely an easy answer. So resolving an environmental issue is not something you can resolve rarely is it something you can resolve in 3 to 6 months. It's going to take a while, whether it's a
Right.
cleanup, or permitting a residential development. It takes time. And there's rarely ever an easy answer because everything is open to interpretation and the law is constantly evolving. So when clients call up and want, do I do A or B? I'm always going to say, well, it depends. Let's talk more about this.
Yes.
The biggest thing I would say is if you have a project, you think that you're going to need an environmental lawyer or you may need an environmental lawyer, bring them in at the beginning of the project. You will save a lot of time and money getting that permitting advice up front. And don't wait until you've applied for a permit and were denied and need an appeal. It's always better to try to find a strategy where you can get the project permitted by understanding what the environmental limitations are than trying to argue with something after you've been told no. So understanding the limitations of a project from an environmental perspective up front, I think could be very valuable for a client.
Sure. So, I mean, if you've got a large plot of property, it's probably best to find out where you can place that garage, warehouse, whatever,
Yep.
beforehand, before you've actually gone and spent the money to get it all set up and ready to go, and then find out you can't do it there. So,
Right. Because, we have hundreds of communities in this state, and they all have different environmental laws.
right.
And so you want to make sure you have a lawyer who will be able to understand that specific community and that specific project and how it fits in to their plan.
So, Corinne, we've talked about beaches, we've talked about who's paying for the wastewater treatment, um, and we've talked about where people are going. So, what beach do you go to? And be warned, you're now telling everybody else to go to this beach because if somebody is aware of wastewater, it will be you. So, where do you go?
Well, Bruce, I think it's kind of an unfair question because, you're asking me to divulge all of my secret, my favorite secret magical places that I learned about around Buzzards Bay for 2 decades.
Right.
But I will share with you and the audience that, above all else, you can find me on Chappaquiddick Beach in West Falmouth
Okay.
at sunset. Watching the sunset in that particular location, the way the light reflects through the water and the sand there is otherworldly.
Well, okay. So now we're going to make sure we've got a big crowd standing in front of you the next time you go. So,
Okay.
oh, so Corinne, thank you so much for taking some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, it's a practice area that I just don't have a lot of background in. So I'm excited to hear your insights and look forward to talking with you again in the future in another podcast. So
Yeah, happy to help, and this has been a pleasure. Thanks, Bruce.
thanks so much.
The MCLE This Week podcast is a production of Massachusetts Continuing Legal Education in Boston, Massachusetts. For sponsorship opportunities, email us at podcast@mcle.org.